On a bright Tuesday morning in Houston, Texas, Dr. Marcus Chen stood in front of the gleaming glass doors of the Metropolitan Convention Center. The building was hosting the annual Space Research Convention, one of the most prestigious gatherings in the aerospace community. Dr. Chen adjusted his casual navy polo shirt, a departure from his usual NASA uniform. After 3 successful space missions and countless hours aboard the International Space Station, he felt comfortable enough to dress down for the event where he would be delivering the keynote speech. The morning had started off roughly when Dr. Chen discovered his official NASA badge was missing from his briefcase. He had likely left it in his other jacket after yesterday's media interview. Still, he carried his NASA credentials and multiple forms of identification, confident that this minor oversight wouldn't be an issue. As he approached the entrance, Dr. Chen noticed the security guard watching him with unusual intensity. The guard, whose name tag read Trevor Wells, was a stocky man in his mid-40s with a stern expression that seemed permanently etched on his face. This was Wells' 3rd week on the job, and he took his position with an almost militant seriousness. "Excuse me, sir," Dr. Chen said politely, reaching for his wallet. "I'm Dr. Marcus Chen, today's keynote speaker. I apologize, but I seem to have misplaced my convention badge. I have my NASA credentials right here." Wells didn't move from his position blocking the entrance. His eyes narrowed as he looked Dr. Chen up and down, lingering on his casual attire. "Yeah, right," he scoffed. "And I'm the President of the United States." Dr. Chen maintained his composure, though he felt his heart rate quicken slightly. He faced similar situations before, but it never got easier. "Sir, I understand your skepticism, but I can prove my identity. Here's my NASA ID, my driver's license, and I'm listed as the keynote speaker in the convention program." Wells barely glanced at the identification cards Dr. Chen held out. "Anyone can fake those these days. You really expect me to believe you're an astronaut?" His voice carried a tone that made several passing convention attendees turn their heads. A small crowd began to gather at a discreet distance, some people pulling out their phones to record the interaction. Dr. Chen could feel the tension building in the air, but he remained calm and professional, drawing from years of training in handling high-pressure situations. "Mr. Wells," Dr. Chen said, his voice steady and clear, "I've spent over 400 days in space across 3 different missions. I'm scheduled to speak in less than 2 hours about our recent discoveries regarding solar radiation effects on space station equipment. Please, just contact the convention organizers to verify my identity." Wells crossed his arms, a smirk forming on his face. "Listen here, buddy. I don't care what story you've cooked up. This is a prestigious scientific convention, not some carnival where anyone can walk in off the street. Why don't you just leave before I have to call for backup?" The crowd had grown larger now, and murmurs of disbelief and anger rippled through the onlookers. A young graduate student in the crowd recognized Dr. Chen from a recent NASA documentary and began urgently whispering to her colleagues. Dr. Chen took a deep breath, reaching for his phone. "I'm going to call Dr. Sarah Martinez, convention director. She can verify who I am." As he dialed the number, he noticed more phones recording the incident, and he could almost feel the story spreading across social media in real time. Wells shifted uncomfortably, but maintained his hostile stance. "Go ahead and call whoever you want. I'm doing my job, protecting this event from imposters. Nobody's getting past me without proper credentials." The situation had escalated far beyond a simple misunderstanding. As Dr. Chen waited for Dr. Martinez to answer his call, he couldn't help but reflect on how such incidents, while painful, often led to important conversations about prejudice and presumptions in professional spaces. Little did he know that this morning's confrontation would soon become a catalyst for significant changes in the scientific community's approach to diversity and security protocols. The tension in the air was palpable as more convention attendees arrived, creating a backdrop of shocked expressions and whispered conversations. This was just the beginning of what would become an extraordinary day at the Space Research Convention, one that would be remembered for years to come. As Dr. Chen waited on the phone, Dr. Sarah Martinez's voicemail greeting played in his ear. The crowd around the entrance had grown significantly, with many respected scientists and researchers watching the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Wells maintained his confrontational stance, but beads of sweat had begun forming on his forehead as he noticed the growing number of people recording the incident. Some of the onlookers had started to voice their disapproval openly. "That's Dr. Marcus Chen," called out Dr. James Wilson, a fellow NASA scientist who had just arrived. "He's one of our most accomplished astronauts. What's going on here?" Dr. Wilson, a tall man with graying hair, pushed through the crowd towards the entrance. Wells turned to face the new voice, his face reddening. "Sir, please stay back. This man claims to be an astronaut, but he has no proper identification or convention badge. I'm just doing my job." Dr. Wilson pulled out his phone and quickly brought up NASA's official website, showing Wells a photograph of Dr. Chen in his spacesuit. "This is him. He's our keynote speaker. Look at the website." Wells glanced at the phone screen but stubbornly shook his head. "That could be anyone. For all I know, this is some kind of organized scam." The situation took another turn when Amanda Torres, a local news reporter who happened to be covering the convention, recognized what was happening. She had interviewed Dr. Chen just last week about his upcoming speech. With her cameraman in tow, she approached the scene. "Dr. Chen," she called out, pushing through the crowd, "I interviewed you last Thursday about your groundbreaking work on the International Space Station. This is absolutely unacceptable." She turned to her cameraman. "Get this on film. We're going live in 5 minutes." Wells began to look increasingly uncertain, but instead of backing down, he doubled down on his position. "Everyone needs to step back right now," he demanded, reaching for his radio. "I'm calling for backup." Dr. Chen, still maintaining his remarkable composure, ended his call attempt and tried one more time to reason with Wells. "Mr. Wells, I understand you're trying to do your job, but look around you. Multiple people here can verify my identity. You're making a serious mistake." Suddenly, a group of students from the convention's youth science program recognized Dr. Chen from their recent field trip to NASA. They had taken pictures with him just last month during their tour. "That's Dr. Chen," one excited teenager shouted. "He showed us the space station simulator. We have pictures with him on our school's website." The crowd's murmuring grew louder, and several people were now on their phones, some calling the convention organizers, others posting about the incident on social media. The hashtag #LetYourChenin was already trending locally. Wells' radio crackled to life. "What's the situation at the main entrance?" a voice asked. Before Wells could respond, Dr. Sarah Martinez's voice cut through the crowd. She had finally arrived, having been alerted by multiple calls and messages. The convention director, a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s, looked furious as she approached. "What in the world is going on here?" she demanded, immediately recognizing Dr. Chen. "Dr. Chen, I am so sorry for this outrageous situation." She turned to Wells, her voice ice-cold. "Mr. Wells, do you realize you're preventing our keynote speaker from entering the building?" Wells' face had turned pale. "Ma'am, he didn't have proper credentials. He's one of the most recognized astronauts in the NASA program." Dr. Martinez interrupted. "His photo is literally on the convention banner right behind you." Indeed, everyone turned to look at the massive banner hanging above the entrance, featuring Dr. Chen in his NASA uniform alongside other notable speakers. Wells finally looked up at the banner, then back at Dr. Chen, his mouth opening and closing without words. The reality of his massive error was finally sinking in, along with the realization that dozens of phones had captured his every word and action. The security supervisor, alerted by the commotion, came running from inside the building. He took one look at the scene, the angry crowd, the news camera, Dr. Martinez's furious expression, and Dr. Chen's calm but resolute stance, and knew this situation would have serious consequences. As Dr. Chen was finally escorted inside by Dr. Martinez, the incident was already spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. What had started as one security guard's prejudiced assumption was about to become a national conversation about racial bias in professional spaces, and no one present could predict the extraordinary chain of events that would follow. Inside the convention center's main lobby, Dr. Martinez led Dr. Chen to a quiet corner while staff members scrambled to handle the growing media presence outside. The morning's events had thrown the convention's carefully planned schedule into chaos. Amanda Torres, the local news reporter who had witnessed the incident, was now broadcasting live from the convention entrance. "I'm standing outside the Space Research Convention where just moments ago, renowned NASA astronaut Dr. Marcus Chen was denied entry by a security guard in what appears to be a clear case of racial profiling. Dr. Chen's phone buzzed continuously with notifications. His NASA colleagues were sending messages of support, while social media mentions were exploding. The video clips of his confrontation with Wells had gone viral, with millions of views in just the first hour. "Dr. Chen," said Dr. Martinez, her voice filled with genuine concern, "I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry we are for this incident. We're preparing a formal statement, and the security company's management is on their way for an emergency meeting." Before Dr. Chen could respond, NASA's public relations team called. They wanted to coordinate their response with him, understanding the sensitivity and significance of the situation. The story had already reached national news networks. Meanwhile, in the security office, Trevor Wells sat with his head in his hands as his supervisor reviewed the security footage. The company's regional director was on speakerphone, his voice sharp with anger. "Wells, do you understand what you've done?" the director demanded. "That man has literally been to space 3 times. He's a national hero, and you treated him like a common trespasser." Wells stammered, "I was just following protocol. He didn't have his badge." "Protocol?" his supervisor interrupted. "Since when does protocol include making racist assumptions and ignoring valid NASA credentials?" The man's face is on a banner larger than a billboard. Outside, the crowd had grown even larger. Scientists, researchers, and convention attendees were sharing their own stories of facing discrimination in professional settings. What had started as one security guard's prejudiced actions had opened the floodgates for a larger conversation. Dr. James Wilson, who had tried to intervene earlier, organized an impromptu gathering in the convention hall. Dozens of scientists, particularly those from minority backgrounds, began sharing their experiences with discrimination in academic and professional spaces. Back in the lobby, Dr. Chen received a call from the governor's office. The governor wanted to personally apologize and discuss how this incident could lead to positive changes in professional security protocols across the state. Social media continued to explode with reactions. The hashtag #DrChen in space began trending nationally, with people sharing photos and videos of Dr. Chen's various space missions and public appearances. One viral tweet read, "Man who literally left Earth 3 times can't enter a building because of the color of his skin. Let that sink in." Dr. Martinez approached Dr. Chen again, this time with a revised schedule. "Dr. Chen, if you're willing, we'd like to modify your keynote speech slot. We think this incident needs to be addressed, and your voice would be powerful in this moment." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. He had spent years speaking about scientific discoveries and space exploration, but now he had an opportunity to address another crucial frontier: the ongoing battle against prejudice and discrimination in professional spaces. The security company's CEO had just released an emergency statement. "We are horrified by the actions of our employee this morning. His behavior goes against everything our company stands for. Effective immediately, Mr. Wells has been terminated, and we are launching a comprehensive review of our training procedures." News helicopters circled above the convention center as more media outlets arrived to cover the story. Inside, Dr. Chen began preparing for his modified keynote address, knowing that his words would now carry even more weight than originally planned. A young black student who had witnessed the entire incident approached Dr. Chen with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Chen, I'm studying astrophysics, and seeing how you handled that situation, it means everything to me and others like me who dream of reaching the stars." As the morning's events continued to unfold, it became clear that this incident would become more than just a viral moment or news story. It was becoming a catalyst for change, a moment that would force many institutions to confront their biases and reform their practices. And at the center of it all was Dr. Marcus Chen, a man who had already broken barriers by soaring into space, now breaking ground in another crucial way. The main auditorium of the Metropolitan Convention Center was packed beyond capacity. What was originally meant to be a speech about space research had transformed into something much more significant. Extra chairs were brought in, and screens were set up in overflow rooms to accommodate the swelling crowd. Dr. Chen stood backstage, reviewing his hastily modified notes. He had spent the past hour restructuring his presentation to address both his scientific work and the morning's events. "We're trending #1 nationally," an assistant informed them. The atmosphere in the auditorium crackled with anticipation. Scientists, researchers, students, and media representatives filled every available space. Among them sat several prominent civil rights leaders who had arrived after hearing about the incident. At exactly 11 o'clock a.m., Dr. Martinez stepped onto the stage. The crowd fell silent as she approached the podium. Today, we witnessed something that should never happen in our scientific community or anywhere else, she began, her voice steady but emotional. We also witnessed dignity, grace, and strength in the face of ignorance. It is my honor to introduce not only one of NASA's most accomplished astronauts, but also a man who showed us all today what true professionalism looks like, Dr. Marcus Chen. The audience erupted in a standing ovation as Dr. Chen walked onto the stage. The applause continued for several minutes, growing louder when people noticed that he was now wearing his official NASA flight jacket over his polo shirt. When the audience finally settled, Dr. Chen adjusted the microphone and looked out over the crowd. His expression was thoughtful, his posture relaxed but commanding. I had planned to talk to you today about my experiences aboard the International Space Station, he began, his voice clear and measured. About how, from space, Earth looks like one unified world without borders or divisions. I still want to share those experiences with you, but first, we need to address what happened this morning. He paused, taking a sip of water. The audience was completely silent, hanging on his every word. When I'm in space, looking down at our beautiful planet, I can't see racism, I can't see prejudice. I can't see the artificial barriers we create between ourselves. What I see is one world, one human race, all sharing this incredible planet we call home. In the back of the auditorium, several security company executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had arrived minutes earlier, preparing to deliver a formal apology after Dr. Chen's speech. But when we returned to Earth, Dr. Chen continued, these artificial barriers become very real. This morning, I wasn't judged by my accomplishments, my education, or my contributions to science. I was judged by assumptions based on my appearance. He clicked his presentation remote, and the screen behind him filled with an image taken from the International Space Station, Earth, a brilliant blue marble suspended in the darkness of space. From up there, every astronaut experiences what we call the overview effect, a cognitive shift in awareness when you see Earth as it truly is. Today, I hope we can all experience a different kind of overview effect, one that helps us see past our prejudices and preconceptions. Dr. Chen then smoothly transitioned into his prepared presentation about space research, but he wove in parallels between breaking barriers in space exploration and breaking social barriers on Earth. He spoke about how diversity in the space program had led to better problem-solving and more innovative solutions. As he spoke, social media continued to light up with reactions. The hashtag overview effect began trending alongside the others, as people shared their own experiences with discrimination in professional settings. In the middle of the audience, the young black student who had spoken to Dr. Chen earlier was furiously taking notes, tears occasionally rolling down her cheeks. Next to her, a group of international scientists nodded in recognition of shared experiences. Towards the end of his speech, Dr. Chen returned to the morning's events. What happened today was unfortunate, but it's also an opportunity to have important conversations, to examine our biases, and to do better. In space, we learn that survival depends on working together, on seeing past our differences. Perhaps it's time we applied that lesson here on Earth. As Dr. Chen concluded his speech, the audience rose once again, this time with even more enthusiasm than before. The applause was deafening, and many were wiping tears from their eyes. What had started as an ugly incident had been transformed into a powerful moment of unity and understanding, all because of how one man chose to handle adversity. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of the changes that would stem from this remarkable day. The hours following Dr. Chen's powerful keynote speech brought waves of reaction across the nation. In the convention center's main press room, reporters from every major news outlet had gathered for an impromptu press conference. Camera lights flashed as Dr. Chen, Dr. Martinez, and NASA's public relations director took their seats at the long table. Dr. Chen, how do you feel about the overwhelming response to your speech? Asked a reporter from CNN, holding her microphone forward. Meanwhile, social media platforms were exploding with activity. The video clips from the morning had been viewed over 50 million times. Celebrities, Politicians and public figures were sharing and commenting on the incident. Even the president had tweeted his support for Dr. Chen and called for a national conversation about racial bias in professional settings. In a corner office upstairs, the security company's executives were in crisis mode. Their phones hadn't stopped ringing since morning. Major clients were threatening to terminate contracts, and their company's stock price had dropped significantly. "We need more than just an apology," insisted their crisis management consultant. "We need concrete action, real changes to prevent this from ever happening again." The company's CEO nodded, drafting a new statement announcing a complete overhaul of their training programs and the creation of a diversity and inclusion board to oversee all operations. Back in the main hall, something unexpected was happening. Scientists from various institutions were organizing an impromptu forum on discrimination in STEM fields. Dr. Wilson, who had tried to help Dr. Chen earlier, was moderating the discussion. "Today's incident has opened a door," a female physicist from MIT declared. "We need to walk through it. How many brilliant minds have we lost because they were made to feel they didn't belong?" The conversation spread beyond the convention center. Universities across the country began examining their own security protocols. Research institutions started reviewing their hiring practices. Professional organizations announced new initiatives to combat discrimination. In the convention center's cafeteria, the young black student who had been moved by Dr. Chen's speech was being interviewed by a local news station. "Seeing Dr. Chen handle that situation with such dignity, it showed me that we can stand up to prejudice without losing ourselves in anger," she said, her voice steady and clear. Social media continued to evolve the conversation. The hashtag #SpaceForEveryone began trending, with people sharing stories of overcoming discrimination in scientific fields. NASA's official accounts shared photos of their diverse astronaut corps, emphasizing their commitment to inclusion. Dr. Chen's phone buzzed with a message from the International Space Station. His former crewmates had heard about the incident and sent a video message of support, filmed against the backdrop of Earth visible through the station's window. Late in the afternoon, several major scientific organizations released a joint statement announcing the creation of the Chen Initiative, a program designed to promote diversity in scientific fields and combat institutional bias. "We're naming it after you," Dr. Martinez told Dr. Chen as they reviewed the announcement. "Your response to this morning's events will impact generations of future scientists." The media coverage had taken an interesting turn. Instead of focusing solely on the negative aspects of the morning's incident, many outlets were highlighting the positive changes it had sparked. Stories began emerging about other professionals who had faced similar discrimination, creating a broader dialogue about systemic change. As evening approached, Dr. Chen received an unexpected call. The governor wanted him to chair a new state commission on professional inclusion and security reform. Similar calls had come from several scientific institutions, all seeking his input on improving their diversity protocols. In the convention center's lobby, a wall that had been blank that morning was now covered with hundreds of post-it notes. Convention attendees had spontaneously created a message wall, sharing their own experiences and words of support. The colorful squares formed a mosaic of stories, each one adding to the larger picture of change. The day was ending, but its impact was just beginning to spread. What had started as one security guard's prejudiced action had catalyzed a movement for change across multiple industries. As Dr. Chen prepared to leave the convention center, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities in this ongoing conversation about inclusion and respect in professional spaces. Looking at the message wall one last time, he spotted a note that simply read, "Today, we didn't just talk about exploring space, we started exploring our own biases. Thank you, Dr. Chen." The next morning, Dr. Chen's story had crossed international borders. News outlets from around the world were covering the incident, and space agencies from different countries began reaching out with messages of solidarity. The European Space Agency, JXA, and Roscosmos all issued statements condemning discrimination in the scientific community. Meanwhile, Trevor Wells, the former security guard, had become the subject of intense media scrutiny. Reporters camped outside his house, seeking comments. His social media history was being examined, revealing a pattern of problematic posts that had somehow escaped his employer's notice during the hiring process. The security company's CEO appeared on several morning news shows, announcing sweeping changes to their organization. "We're completely restructuring our hiring and training procedures," she explained. "We're also partnering with civil rights organizations to develop new security protocols that balance safety with respect and dignity." International scientific conferences began reviewing their own security measures. The European Physics Society announced it would require anti-bias training for all event staff. The International Astronomical Union pledged to create new guidelines for conference security worldwide. Dr. Chen's inbox was flooded with interview requests from international media outlets. A BBC documentary team wanted to feature his story in a series about discrimination in scientific fields. Al Jazeera requested an exclusive interview about his experiences as a minority in the space program. At the convention center, the final day of the Space Research Convention had transformed into something unexpected. Scientists from around the world were joining virtually, turning the event into an impromptu global summit on inclusion in science. "What happened to Dr. Chen isn't just an American problem," declared a prominent physicist from India during a video conference. "These barriers exist everywhere. We need global solutions." Social media continued to amplify the conversation. Scientists from different countries shared their own stories using multiple language hashtags. Hashtag #SpaceForEveryone appeared in dozens of languages, creating a worldwide dialogue about discrimination in scientific fields. The security industry also began feeling the effects. Major security firms started announcing new training programs and hiring practices. Insurance companies specializing in security services updated their requirements, making anti-bias training mandatory for coverage. Dr. Chen received a call from the International Space Station's current crew. They had organized a special broadcast, showing a sign in multiple languages that read "Space knows no barriers, floating in zero gravity." Universities worldwide started examining their campus security protocols. The prestigious Oxford University announced it would revise its security procedures and invited Dr. Chen to speak at a global conference on institutional change. Back in Houston, the security company's training center was undergoing a complete overhaul. Diversity experts were brought in to redesign their entire program. The company's board of directors approved a substantial budget for comprehensive reform, recognizing that their survival depended on meaningful change. Dr. Chen's NASA colleagues organized a surprise video compilation featuring astronauts from different countries sharing messages of support. The video went viral, adding another dimension to the global conversation about diversity in space exploration. Professional security associations worldwide began updating their certification requirements. The International Security Federation announced new standards that included mandatory cultural sensitivity training and anti-bias education. As evening approached, Dr. Chen received news that his story would be included in several international textbooks about institutional change and professional ethics. Educational institutions from various countries wanted to use his experience as a case study in professional development courses. The day ended with a virtual global town hall where scientists, security professionals, and educators from different continents discussed ways to prevent similar incidents. The meeting, translated into 12 languages, attracted participants from over 50 countries. Looking at the global response to his experience, Dr. Chen reflected on how a painful incident had sparked worldwide change. His phone buzzed with another message, this time from a young scientist in Japan, thanking him for giving courage to minorities in scientific fields across the globe. The international reaction showed that while discrimination knew no borders, neither did the desire for positive change. What had started as a local incident had become a catalyst for global reform in how institutions approach security, respect, and inclusion. 7 days after the incident, Dr. Chen sat in his NASA office, reviewing the remarkable changes that had unfolded. His desk was covered with letters from people around the world, sharing their own stories and expressing gratitude for his composed response to discrimination. The morning began with a video conference call with educational institutions across the country. Universities were implementing what they now called the Chen Protocol, a new set of guidelines for security personnel that emphasize respect, proper verification procedures, and cultural sensitivity. "Your experience has become a turning point," said the dean of a prominent engineering school. "We're seeing record numbers of minority students applying to our STEM programs. They say seeing how you handled that situation gave them courage." The security company that had employed Wells had undergone a complete transformation. They had hired a diverse board of advisors and implemented mandatory monthly training sessions. Their new hiring process included extensive background checks for discriminatory behavior and psychological evaluations. Dr. Martinez called with exciting news. Convention centers across the country had adopted new security policies. "We're calling it the Space for Everyone initiative," she explained. "Every security guard must now complete cultural competency training before working at scientific events." In the NASA break room, Dr. Chen found his colleagues watching a new educational video that used his experience as a teaching moment. The video, which would be shown at all NASA facilities, emphasized the importance of judging people by their credentials and character rather than their appearance. Later that afternoon, Dr. Chen received an unexpected visit from a group of elementary school students. Their science teacher had used his story to teach them about both space exploration and treating everyone with respect. "Dr. Chen, when I grow up, I want to be an astronaut like you," said a young girl with bright eyes. "My mom says you showed everyone how to be brave without being angry." The media coverage had evolved from reporting the incident to documenting its impact. Major news networks were running special features on changes in institutional security practices. Magazine covers featured stories about minorities in science, with Dr. Chen's experience as a central theme. Professional security organizations had completely revamped their certification programs. New modules focused on cultural awareness and proper identification procedures. Security guards nationwide were being retrained under these new standards. Dr. Chen's NASA team had just finished reviewing applications for their next space mission. The pool of candidates was more diverse than ever, with many citing recent events as their inspiration to apply. "Your story made them believe they belong here," his supervisor noted, showing him the application statistics. "Sometimes it takes one person standing firm to open doors for others." The scientific community had embraced the moment as an opportunity for lasting change. Research institutions were examining their cultures and practices. Grant committees were reviewing their selection processes for unconscious bias. Late in the afternoon, Dr. Chen received a call from the International Space Station. The current crew had created a special message board in the station, displaying quotes about equality and inclusion against the backdrop of Earth. "From up here, we see no borders, no discrimination," the station commander said. "Your experience helped us bring that perspective down to Earth." Social media continued to spread positive changes. The hashtag #SpaceForEveryone had evolved into a movement, with people sharing stories of breaking barriers in various fields of science and technology. As the day drew to a close, Dr. Chen prepared for his next speaking engagement. Instead of just discussing space exploration, his talks now included messages about breaking down barriers and creating inclusive spaces in science. His phone buzzed with a message from the young black student who had been present during the incident. She had just been accepted into a prestigious aerospace program and wanted him to know that his handling of the situation had influenced her decision to pursue her dreams despite obstacles. Looking out his office window at the NASA campus, Dr. Chen reflected on how a moment of discrimination had transformed into a catalyst for positive change. The security guards' actions, meant to exclude, had instead opened doors for countless others. The last email of the day came from an International Space Conference committee. They wanted him to give the keynote address about creating inclusive spaces in scientific communities. The message ended with a simple but powerful note: "Your grace under pressure has shown us all a better way forward." 1 month after the incident, Dr. Marcus Chen stood on a stage at NASA's main auditorium, preparing to address a unique gathering. The room was filled with an unprecedented mix of people: security professionals, scientists, educators, civil rights leaders, and students from across the country. This was the inaugural conference of the National Initiative for Inclusive Sciences, NIS, a direct result of the events that had unfolded at the Space Research Convention. Dr. Chen had been unanimously chosen to deliver the opening address. "A month ago, I was denied entry to a scientific convention," he began, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "Today, I stand before you as we launch an initiative that will ensure no one faces such discrimination in their pursuit of knowledge." The changes that had occurred over the past month were remarkable. Security companies nationwide had adopted new training programs. Scientific institutions had revised their access protocols. Universities had implemented new inclusion policies, but perhaps most significantly, people's mindsets had begun to shift. In the audience sat Trevor Wells, the former security guard who had requested to attend. After weeks of soul-searching and public apologies, he had become an unexpected advocate for change, speaking at security training sessions about the consequences of unchecked bias. Dr. Martinez, who had become a close ally in the movement for change, presented the data from the past month. Over 500 institutions had adopted the Chen protocol. Applications from minority students to STEM programs had increased by 30%. Security companies reported improved interactions and fewer complaints. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Dr. Chen continued. The real change is happening in everyday interactions and the small moments when people choose to see beyond their preconceptions. The young black student who had been present during the incident was now leading a student initiative for inclusive sciences. She stood to share how the events had inspired a new generation of scientists to pursue their dreams despite obstacles. NASA's director announced the creation of a new scholarship program named after Dr. Chen, aimed at supporting underrepresented groups in space science. The first recipients were present in the audience, their faces beaming with pride and determination. International space agencies had joined the initiative, making it truly global. On screens around the auditorium, astronauts from different countries shared messages about unity and inclusion, some speaking from the International Space Station itself. The security company that had employed Wells had undergone a complete transformation. Their CEO announced that they had become industry leaders in inclusive security practices, conducting training sessions for other companies. Dr. Chen shared his vision for the future. We're not just changing policies and procedures, we're changing the culture of science itself. We're creating spaces where everyone's contributions are valued, where credentials matter more than appearances, where curiosity and capability are the only requirements for entry. The conference included workshops on bias recognition, cultural competency, and inclusive security practices. Security professionals and scientists worked together, breaking down the barriers that had often existed between them. As the day progressed, people shared their own stories of facing and overcoming discrimination. Each story added to the larger narrative of change, showing how one incident had sparked a movement for lasting transformation. Near the end of the conference, Dr. Chen revealed the most significant announcement: the creation of a permanent oversight committee comprising security professionals, scientists, and civil rights experts. This committee would ensure that the changes implemented would continue and evolve. What happened to me was not unique, Dr. Chen concluded, but our response to it can be. We can choose to turn moments of discrimination into opportunities for growth and change. The conference ended with the signing of the Inclusive Sciences Pledge, a commitment to maintaining and expanding the changes that have been implemented. Representatives from hundreds of institutions stepped forward to sign. As people filed out of the auditorium, many stopped to thank Dr. Chen, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. The incident that had threatened to divide had instead united people in a common cause, creating a scientific community where everyone could reach for the stars. Looking out at the dispersing crowd, Dr. Chen smiled. In his pocket was his next mission assignment from NASA, proof that life moved forward. But now, his mission extended beyond space exploration. He had become a catalyst for change, showing that sometimes the most important frontiers to explore were not in the stars above, but in the hearts and